let's return to the question of why do I need to know this stuff, okay? The first and most compelling, really, argument for studying linguistics is that there are professional standards requiring it. Please go to the TSL.org website. If you haven't been there, do it. Even better, become a member of the organization if you can. But there are standards there, the TSL NCATE program standards for teacher education, and these are the things you need to know, okay? Okay, I won't go any further with that. You can look it up. The second argument goes like this. When dealing with students, the main reason that an ESL or EFL teacher needs to know something about linguistics is so that they'll be able to analyze some of the difficulties that the students may be having. And here are some true stories of how this linguistic knowledge comes into play. First linguistic principle, that each language is a system of arbitrarily selected signs, okay? Words and things that are arbitrarily selected. Okay. A college student in a math education program went to Moscow to observe math lessons there, and in his spare time he socialized with Russian colleagues. He seemed to have no difficulty learning Russian gestures. For example, the gesture for drinking, apparently, I was told this is the flicking the side of the neck. Is this true? Okay. Anyway, even if it isn't, the point is clear. But he was puzzled by the fact that he had difficulty remembering the Russian verb for drinking, which apparently is something that sounds like pit. Okay. So the language teacher, in this situation, the language teacher needs to know, why is one sign harder to remember than another? This seems to be okay, but the word pit seems to be. Why would that be difficult for that student? And what are the target language words? What target language words are difficult for that student to remember? Okay. In the area of phonology, the teacher needs to understand how phonemes are perceived and analyzed. And here's another story. Susie went to China to study Mandarin. At first, she was unable to identify the individual sounds that made up the words. To her, they sounded like a jumble of incomprehensible sounds. The language teacher, in this case, needs to know why it is that we have no trouble identifying sounds in our own language, but often can't seem to do the same with the sounds in another language, okay, or an unfamiliar language. Okay, another phonology example. In different languages, there are different syllable systems. Here we go. An ESL teacher couldn't understand why some of her students made particular errors in pronunciation. One student persisted in saying film instead of film, even though the input he was receiving, both printed and spoken, was completely correct. Well, the language teacher needs to think about, why does this student produce, does a student produce the target language forms that are not in the input? What he considers to be target language forms, but that are not correct. They're not in the input he's receiving. Okay, and how should the ESL teacher judge such errors, and how could he deal with them? You know, the question he really needs to ask himself, the teacher anyway, is what is the syllable system of this child's, or this learner's language? And if it's, for example, as in Japanese, consonant, vowel, no consonant clusters, then that would account for this student's problem. Okay, so he needs to understand that instead of just being angry with the student for not getting it, you know. In the area of morphology, the different languages have different ways of forming words. The story is a Chinese speaker was having great difficulty mastering English suffixes, producing sentences such as, I work all day yesterday, and I have two sisters. And why is that so? Well, okay, that again is knowing something about the structure of Chinese. And you don't really have to know Chinese to know that, and I'm telling you now, that Chinese has it's a very isolating language. That is, it has very few affixes, very few endings on words, because the meaning is clear without them. So I have two sister is entirely clear in meaning, because two means plural. Why do you have to add the S? So, all right, that's not a conscious question that this student asked himself, but that was a carryover from his L1, first language. In the area of syntax, that the human facility for language is innate. Here's a story. Oh, this is great. I read this in the New York Times. In Nicaragua, after the 1979 toppling of the brutal and corrupt Somoza regime, deaf children who had been isolated at home were brought together with the purpose of teaching them language. They couldn't seem to learn lip reading or spoken Spanish, but the fact that they were together ignited an amazing phenomenon. I got goosebumps. Almost immediately, the children began communicating with each other through gestures. Within a short time, they managed to agree upon some signs for certain things that they wanted to talk about. And before long, they were introducing a set of grammatical features. Several years later, when word of this reached the U.S., some American linguists flew down to Nicaragua to observe the children. What they found was a flourishing community of children communicating happily in a new language which they had invented from zero. The language teacher or the observer of this needs to know that these children are tapping into their universal grammar, right? Which is the only way that they were capable of performing such an amazing feat. All right, a couple more here. In the area of semantics, understanding how word meanings are learned. The story about a Polish-speaking student discovered that looking up a word in the dictionary was little help to him in learning how to use it. Even when the dictionary entry included examples. For example, he looked up the phrase laid back, okay? Laid back, and he saw laid back, and he saw the phonetic transcription of it, of a person or behavior, informal, calm and relaxed. She always seems so laid back. Laid back style, laid back manner. That was the dictionary entry. But he wondered, does laid back mean the same as calm? Okay, does it mean the same as relaxed? One day, the student heard someone say, "Oh, my mom wouldn't mind you staying over. She's totally laid back." Having heard someone actually use the term laid back, the student immediately understood what it meant and began to bring it into his functional vocabulary. So the teacher needs to know why it is that hearing language in use helps learners grasp the meaning of the word. Of course it does. And why dictionaries are little help. In the area of psycholinguistics, that certain cognitive functions are situated in different parts of the brain. Here's the story. An EFL student in a Japanese university was being taught by a non-native English instructor. The program emphasized reading and grammatical competence. After 5 years of study, the student could produce grammatically correct sentences, speak fairly well, and had an extensive English vocabulary. However, her listening skills were hardly developed. And when she met a native speaker of English for the first time, she was surprised to discover that she was utterly unable to comprehend his speech. Why couldn't she understand him? What had happened, okay? How was this student able to learn the parts of language she knew so well and was able to perform so well on written language? And why was her listening so underdeveloped? Well, you should get that in the methods course. Okay, and in the area of linguistic pragmatics, understanding how discourse works, here's the story. A teacher in an inner-city school was frustrated by the fact that ESL students in her class didn't follow her directions. On one occasion, the students refused to hand in their work, their homework or whatever it was. They'd been working on a grammar test when the bell for the end of the class rang. And the teacher said, "Guys, your time is up. Do you want to hand in your papers now?" To her dismay, she heard some of the students say no. Well, that's in the area of pragmatics. And what was the problem here? She didn't say what she meant. Or, if I think of it on the other hand, they didn't understand what she meant. She was using a feminine form, which is to soften it by making it a question. How would you like to hand in your papers? Okay.